Welcome to Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon, the national security podcast that provides you an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon, and together we'll break down the headlines shaping our world and ask how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's July 27th, 2025. Let's get to it. Hey, good morning, Sue. How are you?
Morning, Eric. I'm frustrated.
Yeah? What's going on?
I'm kind of frustrated on the professional and the personal front. So on the professional front, I'm so flummoxed by this whole conversation about Director Gabbard and now the FBI talking about indicting someone over what I believe is a fundamental misunderstanding, if not malfeasance and distraction of the intelligence community's work around 2016 and Russian attempts to influence that election. It's maddening. It's maddening to me because the data they continue to release does not prove the incendiary bottom line that they're trying to effect, which is somebody has done something criminal. And it just keeps being repeated, and there just isn't underlying truth to it. So that maddens me. And then the other thing, this is just on a personal front, I'm super frustrated because when you're treating cancer with chemo, there are side effects that are also deleterious. And one of them has kind of had me isolated from friends and family. Like I can't get out and about. And
Yeah.
that's just hard for me. I mean, I'm glad we're going to beat the cancer, but come on. Girls
Yeah.
got to see your people.
Getting a little stir crazy.
Yep.
Yeah, it is unfortunate though. Like they don't think we can read. Like the titles are one thing, and then the body of the documents say something completely different. Like the argument's not there. But anyway, it is frustrating. I think we can get on with it. I had a random question for you. I was going to ask you if you ever thought about getting a PhD, or if you did, what would it be in?
Great question. So the reason I joined the CIA is because I couldn't decide between going to law school and getting my PhD. And I thought that was too big an uncertainty gap. Like you can go and get an undergraduate degree in almost anything and you're going to learn how to think. But when you go into graduate school, you better know which one it is. It would have been a PhD in biomechanics, and it would have followed on from my honors thesis. So now everyone knows I was a zoology major.
Right.
By training. So ready for the topic of my honors thesis?
Yeah.
It was a structural and mechanical analysis of the mesoglea of sea anemones. It was a very readable, totally.
Wait, say that one again. Just slow down.
Structural and mechanical analysis of the mesoglea of sea anemones. And
awesome.
Super readable. I can make it available in the notes for anyone that needs to read it. But yeah, I probably would have gone on and gotten my PhD in biomechanics. And really looked at how structure relates to function in living systems. Here's the deal. I had a career I had no right to, but if you asked me if I had any regrets, it would be that I didn't go back and get an advanced degree because I love learning. You know, now I don't know what I'd go back and do, but I'm totally open for an honorary doctorate just so I can check off that bucket list.
Yeah, I'm impressed. The PhD has to be remarkably specific, right? And that is a very niche thing. So
it is.
Good job. Yeah, it can't just be in zoology or in national security, right? It's got to be very detailed and specific. So You nailed it.
All right. So what should we talk about this week?
All right. Let's get to some headlines. This week in the threat picture, the Trump administration releases a detailed AI action plan, deregulation, anti-bias mandates, and state supremacy over AI governance. The U.S. greenlights Nvidia to resume AI chip sales to China, a reversal that could sharpen Beijing's capabilities and dull America's tech edge. We'll discuss if market forces are enough and if the U.S. is making the right trade-offs. All right, so Sue, we'll start with the AI action plan, the good, the bad, and the biased. The Trump administration launched what it calls the AI Action Plan, a sweeping effort to remove barriers to American leadership in artificial intelligence. The plan frames AI not just as a tool, but as the engine of a new industrial revolution, an information revolution, and a cultural renaissance. It sets out a vision for unquestioned and unchallenged U.S. superiority grounded in deregulation, infrastructure, investment, and global standard setting. though it wasn't a we choose to go to the moon moment in terms of the speeches and the release. I think this policy has some teeth. Critics of it have said that AI leaders like Sam Altman were calling for regulation previously, and then now this comes out and this says reduce regulation, but it literally is a regulation, right? It is saying what the government's going to do and how they're going to set controls. I was excited about it. Reading through all 28 pages of the plan, I think there's a lot there. I think there's a lot of good action. I think there's a lot of work still to be done, but it does a really good job of laying out some of the challenges and where some of the government agencies need to take action and some future investment there. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good actionable plan. This is something that actually using big issues and developing and pressing for actions is something that the Trump administration does well. I think it did it well in its first administration with the cyber solarium that was the foundation that became some of the things the Biden administration took on. And I think we improved cybersecurity writ large. And I think this does the same thing. It has three great pillars of accelerating innovation in lots of ways, whether that is deregulation, as you mentioned, to kind of encourage the innovation in the private sector, but also talks about a national AI research center. And we will probably talk about this over and over and over again. There are three things the government is good at. One is big problems, second is long time horizons, and third is deep pockets. And this is one that kind of takes those strengths and throws them into play. Big problem, investing in some research and starting now because this is a big problem. So I love that it accelerates innovation. It does talk about AI infrastructure. You and I talked about it the last couple times in terms of you can't just want the thing, you have to have the ecosystem to allow it. So this talks about it in terms of data centers, enhancing the grid, and training for the workforce. And then it also talks about we have to lead international security and diplomacy on this front. Again, we cannot not participate internationally in this front. One, we have friends and allies that would like to join us to be able to have free and open societies, be the ones dictating this. So I think that's good. I will say it does prioritize speed, deregulation, and corporate aligned innovation in hopes of assuring our leadership. And there are trade-offs in terms of civil liberties, environmental protections, and democratic governance. So it emphasizes one and trades it off the other. And we might talk about that a little later as we go on. The other thing I love about it, it has really good interactions with the cyber work that's already going on. There are real opportunities to take what's going on nationally in terms of cybersecurity and intermingling with AI policy. It elevates AI-specific cyber risk management and incident response into the federal agenda. It advances cyber-aware export policy, aligning AI with national cyber posture. It emphasizes standards and design principles for secure and critical infrastructure deployments, and it implicitly supports a cyber AI workforce pipeline. So not only do I think it has some really good features just on the straight AI, but, I worry about cyber more than anything in a disproportionately digital world. And boy, if you're not careful with AI, you can do some real damage on the cyber front. And I think this has some really nice hooks in that we can play.
Yeah, the national center's a really good idea. It even mentions the national labs partnering with universities and research. And there's a really strong theme throughout about research and science and collaboration. And you kind of get a vibe from this administration of some of the questionable science practices, specifically with the MAHA movement and some of the stuff coming out of RFK Jr.'s camp. But this was seemingly based in science and traditional research, even talking about biology research. I thought that was really cool. And then also emphasizing the trades and the skills and the infrastructure that we're going to need to be successful here, right? There's a trades gap in terms of all the plumbers and the HVACs and the electricians you're going to need to build and run these data centers and stuff. And there will be trade-offs, right? You're going to have to make some concessions on where they're going to go and upgrading some of the power line grid. I thought that was a little bit on the weaker side in
Yeah.
terms of we're just going to make what we have better.
Yeah.
Okay, how you going to do that? And maybe it's not completely staffed yet. They wanted to get this thing out. That is still kind of a long pull for me. But I completely agree with your points about the cyber and their mention of it needs to be secure from the ground up and making that from the beginning one of the initiatives. I think you've talked about that before.
Yeah, I do think every governmental program or proposal or action plan that is not yet tied to a budget has the same problem. I really do worry a bit about the implementation capacity, who's paying for it, and at the same time you're trying to find this investment, you have Doge impacts of choosing some winners and not. So I
Right.
think there is an openness. I actually have a proposal on this front, and that is all the big internet service providers, Microsoft, Oracle, Amazon, to some extent IBM, why don't they build out a data center infrastructure on their dime, choose locations across the US that are not in the standard places that we put everything so it can become both an attractant for jobs, an attractant for talent, that we don't always get into anything. And then we start having a national backbone upon which we can do. That's my proposal. Sorry for my friends at all those companies. I love you, but I don't know who's going to pay for all this. And I worry that these grand plans with a administration that is trying to shove things off from the federal level, boy, we're starting to put a lot of things on state and local. So that's my big question is, how are we going to implement it? But that being said, it's a pretty good framework from my perspective.
One of the things it highlights too is the conversation of biases.
Uh,
And I want to read this quote from the introduction section of the policy. Quote, our AI systems must be free from ideological bias and be designed to pursue objective truth rather than social engineering agendas when users seek factual information or analysis. AI systems are becoming essential tools, profoundly shaping how Americans consume information, but these tools must also be trustworthy. You've talked a lot about trust in media and trust in the information we get, and AI presents some challenges with that with respect to deep fakes and some of the other things that you can generate. Something I want to mention though is the data we're training on is created by humans. Right? As such, humans inherently have biases. And so there's bias inherent in all these programs. Bias is a reason to be nice to your chatbot, not just hedging your risk of the AI overlords one day. But also, I think you get a better product when you say hello. And that's because of the human bias. We're more receptive as human beings to help someone if they're polite to us.
Totally agree. I can't believe we haven't talked about that before, but I say please and thank you. I tell them when I really like an answer. And even if I don't like an answer, I said, that's pretty good, but have you considered? I absolutely agree with you. I don't think I'd thought about it in terms of just it does come from humans and we respond better to consideration. Yeah, I like it.
I also almost think of it as like raising a child. Right? They're learning everything about the world. They're going to make mistakes, and our job is to steer them and teach them what's right and wrong. Some of the high profile ones are create an image of the Vikings, and they weren't the right skin tone. AI has implemented some of the DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion parameters and taken it to an extreme that's caused a hallucination or gotten it wrong. And I think this is just part of the growing process of training and shaping this. Sue, what are your thoughts on the language with regard to the bias and how we combat that going forward?
I think bias is a real issue that has to be dealt with. Interesting, we call it artificial intelligence, and one of the most important things about human intelligence is not inserting your bias or your mirror imaging into your assessment of the activities you see, to be really open about just assessing what is and trying to understand it rather than doing it. And I think that's what worries me a little bit about how that gets done when you have so favored the industry innovation side and you've de-emphasize the regulation side, and there would be some guidance and some involvement that you would think would come into helping what the standards are to eliminate bias, just like some of the standards on security. So I think that speed, push, deregulation, private sector could make also addressing bias harder to do because that's not where the incentives are coming from. So that's one. And then the second is a concurrent executive order that's coming on anti-woke, and it worries me so much if you interpret bias as I'm going to take out bias that I assess is being shown to a particular viewpoint, and you're basically replacing that viewpoint with another human viewpoint. I think that could be super. I think one of the things that you and I might talk about in subsequent episodes is what's happening to free speech in the name of free speech. But I think this is really worrisome battleground because if it starts going faster and on top of it, you impose a particular viewpoint or absence of viewpoint, to your point about it's humans that do the teaching is something that I think bears watching as we go along. And I think that morphs a little bit into another issue that you and I have talked about is the local impact. So I mentioned the economic one, who's paying for it. I think this is really interesting that there's a federal versus state tension, but it's really the obverse of what we've seen before is now with AI. You see language in this that says, no, the federal will determine what the states are allowed to do. And actually, to build on your point about the cultural foundation of what we know and how we process information, just like tools developed in the United States may not be appropriate for tools developed in South Africa. Just not the same cultural foundation, and culture is a huge part. If you make federal guidance overcoming local impacts and local perspective, I think that is intellectually problematic. And actually, it's a challenge I would give to this administration. Where's your line on federal versus states' rights? This is going to be purposely aggressive, but we're going to not give states the rights over how you train your AI tools, but you do give states rights over what women can do with their bodies. My brain just blows up with cognitive dissonance about where that line is. So I think, again, overall great plan, overall good things, direction of goodness, but man, there are a couple buried things in here that bear watching as it gets implemented to make sure that we aren't putting undue burden or exerting undue influence on things that'll increasingly make a difference.
They're also just words, and the actions still need to be completed. It's a good call to action, but we need to follow up and see how all this gets implemented.
Yeah, it's kind of why we started this podcast in the first place. This is worth paying attention to because it is a way forward.
Can I pull your thread on the cultural differences?
Sure.
Real quick. So certainly very different cultural dynamics within our own country, right?
Mhm.
Some of the foods that we prefer in the South versus the Northeast and dialects and things like that. But how do you reconcile those distinct cultures and allowing the states, delegating to the states some of this local impact without creating more divisiveness, which we already have plenty of in this country?
Great question. I think that's the tension that we're always playing with,
Yeah.
right? Diversity is good. Discontinuity is bad. One of the things that again, we're trying to accomplish here is set out a view of the real issues that we face as a nation. And there are real issues that we face that I don't think are getting enough play. Highlight those so we can have a national dialogue on it. To go back is we're disbanding the Department of Education at the federal level because we believe that localities should be able to determine their best educational needs. How are we sure that that's not going to create incredible educational disparities just based on the resources? But on this, we're going to say, no, we're going to mandate how tools work, but we want to make sure that states can serve the needs of their people. I think this is a really big topic for Americans to discuss. And again, I don't know that either you and I have the solution to it. We each have our perspectives of where we'd come down. But I think these are the issues worth discussing, and they are the ones that are worth discussing with your representatives as you send people either into your state house or to Washington to highlight the issues so bills don't pass with imprecise language that forces an outcome that is not consistent with the values or the interests that you have.
We'll move on to the U.S. greenlights Nvidia to resume AI chip sales to China. The Trump administration's decision to greenlight Nvidia sales of the H20 AI chips to China makes a sharp shift in U.S. export control policy. These chips were originally designed to comply with restrictions by being less powerful than Nvidia's flagship H100. So initially, 2022, they said you have to build a slower chip that's not as good at doing AI training. Talk a little bit later about how it's actually better for inference, which is what we're kind of moving to in terms of actually using AI. But in 2024, they created a tiered system. 19 allied nations, including Taiwan, were granted full access to the suite of NVIDIA chips, while 17 European Union member states saw their access capped. 10 others received no restriction at all. Enforcement, though, has been patchy at best. According to a Financial Times article, more than $1 billion worth of NVIDIA's most advanced chips, including the banned H100 and 200, have already flowed into China through a thriving black market. Some are being openly sold on social media. They're pre-installed in plug-and-play server racks sourced from U.S. assemblers. And one vendor likened the scene to a, quote, seafood market. The racks were tested, handed over, and gone within hours. So you can kind of imagine this seedy Asian market with fish on one side and NVIDIA servers on the other, right?
Yeah, thanks for that visual.
To some, this reflects a broader trend, a willingness to trade long-term technological advantage for short-term economic or diplomatic gain. The H20 chip, which is critical for fast-growing field of AI inference, will strengthen China's AI development while doing little to slow its drive for semiconductor independence. The argument here is for market forces to prevail. We are still ahead, and through sale of these chips, we'll continue to stay ahead. So one man's pivot is another man's flip-flop. Just like one man's terrorist, another man's freedom fighter. Is this pivot or flip-flop on behalf of the administration good for us, Sue, or what are your thoughts?
Wow, I'm of two minds, or said differently, I think there are good arguments to be made. I think an overarching consideration is this is China, and companies have made this mistake many times in the past where they think they're just selling or entering into some sort of joint venture or partnership, when in fact China's intention is to actually take the whole market for themselves. We find ourselves a minute later without the positioning that we thought we had. So here's the pro, why you can see it. You can't be a leader if you can't participate. It will be really hard for our industry to have the resources it needs to continue to advance if they can't sell or participate with basically the world's largest consumer in China. It is leverage we have, and we know that President Trump loves leverage to try and get a deal that we perceive to be in our favor. I think there are those who argue, I might have even argued, that every technology is available to everyone. It's the one that puts it to use faster that's going to win. And so I think there's reason to say, isn't everyone going to get there? And is it worth retarding ourselves, whether that is our strategic leadership or whether that is industrial strength, by doing it? But I will say, on the con side, I do believe in strategic advantage. We have, as a nation, and used and benefited from being the world's technology leaders, and it is our technology that has basically powered our friends and allies and have given us the confidence that we have a successful approach that will give us strength and advantage if conflict ever occurs. I think there's still, I'm going to say, a moral component to how the U.S. uses technology. There are places we won't go. So what we will do with our technology, how our government will use these technologies is very different. from how China's government was very different. We have bright lines between the government and the private sector. We have bright lines between the government and the people and privacy rights. China doesn't have the same thing. And so basically, you're putting your technology in the hands of someone that isn't going to put the same constraints on it that you are. We have a history of export controls based on the idea that the government is the one that's generating the technology. And so most of our export controls come from missile technology control regime, and it's list-based, and we knew that it was going to be impactful. We are really struggling when so many of the advances are coming out of the private sector, and it's only over time that their uses and the advantage they provide gets exposed. So I don't think that from a national security, and I mean big-ass national security, we have the foundational understanding to know what the impact of sharing this technology is going to be. So there are good arguments on both sides. I think it comes down to how strategically thoughtful we are about implementation. That has not proven to be this administration's, but even before it, on the technology control perspective, that hasn't been our strong suit. So I think the way I'd get through this moment is to not be dogmatically opposed to it, but really start putting the things in place that allow us to understand where that bright line is between what we must allow and what we can't allow.
The difference here was going to be $15 billion of chip sales in China with that H20 is what they were looking at for Nvidia. And the idea being they're going to reinvest a majority of their revenue to then do more research and development to continue pushing us further and further ahead. So I want to introduce a new segment here. It's called Who's Responsible? We've got a couple different folks we want to peel the onion back on. You've got the private sector, and specifically here is Nvidia and some of the other chip making companies. You've got the government, citizens, and the media. And I was hoping you would go through for us and talk about how you think each of these has some portion of responsibility in terms of our national security, but then also who is the most responsible and what they can do to help make sure we're secure going forward and it's in our best interest.
Who is responsible? Who is responsible? Responsibility, let it ride. Responsibility, make it mine.
So looking at it, Sue, in terms of who's responsible.
Okay, so you want both a rundown and a weighting. I love it.
Yeah.
So private sector's responsibility starts with their part of the threat surface that our adversaries and competitors are attacking, whether it's theft of intellectual property, insinuating themselves into the investment scheme, or actually trying to influence how our people and lawmakers vote to be able to shape the environment to their advantage. I love that we've got a vibrant private sector. Our innovation engine is so profoundly valuable and gives us strength. It is why our adversaries and competitors come here. But come on, grow up. You are a national security decision maker. So you got to protect that IP, recognize that when you share your technology, it will be reverse engineered. Resources will be put against it. Your base will become the exact same thing that you say you're going to do with the revenue. It's going to be the point of departure now for their growth. Just think about it in terms of revenue and market capture. Think about who you're taking money from. And quite frankly, you are the ones that understand best the extension of this. If you apply how it can be extended to your understanding of the environment that makes you able to succeed here, the freedoms it allows you to do, you need to be mindful of that. Maybe put controls in, although controls in the technology itself are harder to come by ever since Edward Snowden. Because when he revealed U.S. involvement, our purchasers were able to demand that U.S. show them source code, and we lost a lot of things that way. So I'm not advocating for manipulating in government control, but I'm just saying, do understand what the extension is going to be. So that's private sector. The government, I think we have work to do in terms of understanding how we want to operate in a world where technology is disproportionately open. I don't think our control regimes are particularly useful now. Lists won't make it. I do think there needs to be more work done by the government in terms of understanding threats and vulnerabilities, particularly with technology. So when questions like this come up, we have a really robust look of what other nations are able to do. And so I'm going to put this on the government and the intelligence community to really dive into doing almost net assessments of technologies in terms of threats and vulnerabilities, so we know when these questions come up, we can actually talk to the companies and come up with a good national solution. To the point about the difference between the U.S. legal construct and China's, when we put these technologies into China's, as I say, China has a whole of country approach where there just aren't the bright lines between the government and the private sector and the citizen. And they have national security laws that can compel each of those portions of their society to participate in their national security objectives. So when we provide that technology, just understand what we're enabling to happen within that country and how that country will use it, both against their own citizens, but against their adversaries and competitors. So I think being mindful of the different national security laws, I am not advocating that we change ours. I'm not advocating we get rid of the bright lines. I love privacy. I love competition. But I do think understanding the differences and understanding the risks on both sides is worthwhile. Citizens, I think their responsibility in this one, which is to just understand that threats to our way of life and their ability to thrive and pursue what they want to pursue are in 2025 not necessarily the same thing I experienced, which was duck and cover drills in first grade because we thought that global thermonuclear war was going to break out. Threats to national security look different. They're economic, they're ideological, and so be a little more mindful about these issues that seem kind of remote to you. Who cares what technology goes where? We already lost this one once when the telecommunications industry gave away basically broadband, and then China controls so much of it through Huawei, and it's insinuated into our society. And that data is accessible by China, no matter whether you think it's yours or not. And the media, we're Schoolhouse Rock, and the more you know, to talk about what a digitally connected world means in terms of some of these threats and the choices you're making. So in terms of percentage, I'm going to give citizens and media 10% each because, come on, get educated and take some time to share these issues. I'm going to give government on this one I'm going to give them the next 50%, and then I'm going to give private sector 30%. I think the government's got to step up in terms of how we understand that balance between threats and opportunities so that we're aggressively pursuing both without giving away the farm. Fix anything you think I'm wrong on, Eric.
I think that was a great rundown. I think the private sector, Nvidia specifically, is on the front line here. So some of that monitoring that you mentioned and was mentioned in the AI policy, they're going to be the first ones to see it. And whether the government guidance is sufficient or not, see something, say something, right? They're going to be able to understand where their chips are being used and see some of that feedback from the customers and understand where they're going next. And it's not just about the bottom line, but our strategic advantage going forward. There was a podcast this week from the New York Times Daily. They had a gentleman named Trip Mickle on, and he had a great analogy that, have you heard this, a NASCAR analogy with respect to chips? So apparently he used to do some reporting in NASCAR, and in NASCAR, go fast, turn left. There is about one company now, Hendrick Motorsports, that produces the engines for most NASCAR cars. And they sell it. They take those proceeds from the other competitors and they reinvest in improving better engines and better cars. And what they're banking on is that even though their engine that they produced in the car right next to them might win, they're going to win the race because they've got a different driver, they've got different aerodynamics, they've got different other parts. And so it's this idea that, sure, we can give these chips to China, but we've got the better innovation cycle. We've got all the other better components. We've got the better AI companies that we're not going to be at a disadvantage. So, and is that overconfidence or is that where we should be thinking?
I think it's a perfect analogy to what the U.S. advantage is and why everyone comes here to steal our intellectual property and our talent. And, that old math proof that said in the race between the tortoise and the hare, if the tortoise gets a head start, the hare can never catch it because as soon as the hare gets to where the tortoise was, the tortoise will have moved. Gets a great intellectual argument and has held true. Two thoughts. Number one, man, as we go in more and more to automated systems, has that judgment advantage of our humans and our competitive environment, does that lessen? In other words, does the technology itself and even advanced technology move at such a pace that human advantage and that environment advantage is minimized? So that's one. And the second thing is, and back to my responsibility for government, so I might give them another 3% of responsibility. We've got to reconcile this isolationism with leadership. The U.S. has benefited from foreign talent coming here to either participate in our ecosystem or to be educated here since, at the very least, World War II. It is one of the great strengths that we have. It adds to a little bit about what you said, which is even when people go overseas and take their talents back home, they were educated here, and so we fundamentally know that. I think we have to reconcile our immigration policies with our intention to be global leaders. Just don't think you can become isolationist on the human front and then expect to be leaders on the technical front if you don't resolve those two things.
What are your thoughts on encouraging the world to choose the U.S. stack? So we're talking a lot about China and U.S. direct competition, but there are many other countries in the world that will be using AI, not just developing countries, but India, Europe, allies, and also competitors. If they're using the US stack, they get into our ecosystem. It's like the Apple products. Once you buy an iPhone, now you're connected with the iMac and the iWatch, and it's much harder for those switching costs to go somewhere else.
Yep. Good argument. One we've used for a long time. The world's weapons were all built disproportionately on U.S. technology because it was available, because you could come into our free and open society and either buy it or steal it. That was a great comfort that we understood. I still say that as particularly China, and don't sleep on Russia, even though they are societally and economically more constrained, man, some of their technical advances of the years have been amazing. So I'm not in favor of decoupling. That's one of the reasons not. But I will just say don't count on that as being your strategic advantage because everyone is advancing at a rapid rate, and there will be differentiation because now they have the infrastructure and the training to be able to differentiate. So don't believe in isolationism, don't believe in decoupling, would prefer a strategy to give us advantage still.
Yeah, I think we still have to maintain our self-interest,
Yeah.
like you said.
For sure.
Maybe I'm just a little too Hobbesian, but, I care about myself most, right?
Yeah,
Our
I mean,
country.
it is legitimate for the United States to have self-interest, right? There's
That's okay.
nothing wrong
Yeah.
with us being just as righteous about what we need. Strategy to achieve that in a world that is moving information as fast as it can and building capability as fast as it can is probably useful.
I want to transition here real quick just to talk a little bit about leadership and Jensen Huang, CEO of Nvidia specifically. So the Founders Podcast, episode 376, lifting everybody up here. He had a really good breakdown of not a biography of Jensen. It was more about Nvidia. Be a lot of good information there. Highly recommend. But I think he's the man now. He's got to rise to the moment, It's the first $4 trillion company. I think he kind of realized that in the past couple of months. He wasn't at the inauguration. He was actually in China during the inauguration. So he wasn't sitting in the row with all the other tech leaders. But he realized with this H20 chip getting reduced, he got a coin, got a seat at Mar-a-Lago at that $1 million dinner, and was able to make his case and continued working with David Sachs to make this case. But I think he's been a strong leader and built this company over the last 30 years. But now he's a national security decision maker.
Right.
And so if you were on his board of advisors, Sue, or you had a chance to sit down and talk to him and he asked you, what should I be thinking about? What do I need to do here in this moment specifically? What would you say to him?
You know what is going to be a strategic advantage, right? Not just economically for your country, but in terms of performance. You know, when you develop those chips, your engineers have some of the best ideas about where they're going to go. Be thoughtful in that decision, right? Especially because of the AI rollout, of the AI action plan rollout, who was sitting in that front row?
Where's Jensen? Where's my boy Jensen?
Right,
Yeah.
right. So, with great opportunity comes great responsibility. So that would be one. From whom are you taking your money? Who's influencing your decisions? And just be real thoughtful. I want him to go as hard as he can, right? I want America's leadership in technology. I think it tends to be more ethical, relevant, will drive our nation forward as well. But this is not a peaceful world. And so he needs to feel that more. As for these companies that are making these big decisions, I'm a super advocate for sharing more intelligence at a deeper level about adversaries' capabilities and intent so that they have more wherewithal to make some of these decisions we're asking of them before it's this last moment of whether I sell them as part of a deal to get it. So even on that one, I put some responsibility on the government. But feel the weight of your responsibility. And now you have not just investors as shareholders, you have this nation as a shareholder. So be mindful of your responsibility to it. That's what I'd say.
Yep. We're all stakeholders.
Yep.
In our national security.
Yep.
I think we've got a lot to be excited about. And I think there's usually a lot of gobbledygook surrounding AI, and a lot of people just say, AI, we'll throw AI at it. And this policy had a lot of really good language and a lot of really good ideas. And you can learn a few things if you have a chance to read it. And again, hopefully be as positive as we are about the way forward. We'll get into some predictions now. So checking the scoreboard last week, I had a check that was very weak. So no points. In fact, I should probably lose a point for being soft.
Yeah.
So you predicted no indictments out of the ODNI shenanigans. How'd we do there?
No indictments.
Yeah. Neither for
Yep.
yourself nor Jim Clapper.
Yeah. Yeah. No, when I play fast and loose with somebody else, I kind of want President Obama to just show up at the FBI and said, well, the president said I was guilty, indict me. But easy for me to say, right? No indictments are going to come on this.
No.
They're just not. Like I said, at best, they're misunderstanding it, and they're making a splashy play that will never manifest.
Yep. All right, moving into next week. My predictions are the Washington Commanders will keep their name. They will not revert back to being the Washington Redskins. I also predict that Rosie O'Donnell will keep her citizenship. She'll probably stay in Ireland, but I don't think she's going to get her citizenship revoked. I think this is all distractions.
Yeah, I
from
think
Jeff.
the Commanders, I don't know. It could
Do you
be
think they'll go back?
Well, no. Only because there's that move to
The RFK Stadium?
yeah, that move into
Yeah.
DC. Yeah. So, we've seen universities crumble and law firms crumble, but I think you might be right, even though I hate the name Commanders. I liked Washington football team. Okay, my predictions. I predict that somewhere in our near future, we will do an episode focused almost entirely on digital currency.
Okay, hold on. That feels like a little bit of collusion there.
Yeah, a little bit.
Like, don't you set the lineup and what we talk about?
Settle down. Don't show everything. Okay. So this is just a tease for the future. Okay, I do have real predictions. because I can't stay out of sports. I think either Stephanie or White or Caitlin Clark will survive this offseason, the Indiana Fever, but not both. I think it's a mismatch between a coaching philosophy and a player for the same reason that Luka Doncic left Dallas. Do you like a heliocentric player like Doncic or Caitlin Clark, or do you not? So that's my prediction.
Man, that Luka trade was so dumb. I think he got along fine with Jason Kidd. It's just, we'll see if this Cooper Cup draft pick and lucky lottery can save the GM there, because that was boneheaded. And if Kyrie stays healthy and Anthony Davis can get healthy, they've got a lot of good players.
Yes, I almost predicted that the drafting of Cooper Flagg would force them to bring Luka back, because you have two, although both of them like having the ball in their hand, they're both fundamentally unselfish.
Yeah.
And boy, that would be a really fascinating thing for other teams to try and defend. So that was my other way I was going to go, but I'm kind of focusing that some coaches just don't like players that are heliocentric.
That's what we're watching. Thank you for joining us, and no doubt there's more to come. This country's strength isn't in its power, industry, or government, but in its people.
Thank you for joining us. As always, remember, we're here for you. Look for a link to the show notes to provide feedback or suggest topics for the next time. I'm told that feedback is a gift, and Eric and I both believe it because we give each other feedback a lot. Join us next week for the Understandable Insights podcast, wherever you listen. And as always, go forth, do good, and for goodness sakes, be kind to one another.